Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. 1,000 years had passed since the last holy light judge had walked the earth. The legends spoke of the chosen ones, selected by heaven itself, wielders of divine power sent to cleanse the world of sin and corruption. But the world below had changed. Men no longer spoke of the holy light with reverence. Its doctrine, once guiding and benevolent, had hardened, becoming a tool wielded by the powerful. And now, without warning, a new judge had been chosen, not from the ranks of the devout but from the simplest of places. Avril had lived her entire life in the small village of Clearbrook. The village nestled between rolling hills, a haven of peace and simplicity. She spent her days tending to the sick, patching up the scrapes of children, and offering what little healing she could to those in need. Her touch had always been gentle, her words kind, and it was said that the gods had blessed her with the ability to heal. But Avril had never imagined that heaven was watching her, weighing her soul, and preparing her for something greater. It began on the evening of the summer solstice. The village was bathed in a golden light as the sun lingered on the horizon, casting long shadows over the fields. Avril had just returned home after visiting old Yana, the village elder, whose arthritic joints had been troubling her more than usual. The cool night breeze whispered through the open window of Avril's small cottage when suddenly, the air grew still. The birds stopped chirping, and the very earth beneath her feet seemed to hold its breath. A beam of pure white light, unlike anything Avril had ever seen, pierced the night sky, and with it descended a figure cloaked in shimmering radiance. Seraphiel, the divine emissary, stood before her, a figure of ethereal beauty, with wings that stretched out in a cascade of glowing feathers. His eyes were like pools of liquid gold, filled with the weight of centuries. Avril of Clearbrook, his voice rang like a bell, cutting through the silence of the night. You have been chosen. Chosen for what? Avril's voice was barely a whisper, her hands trembling as she stood frozen in the presence of such power. Seraphiel stepped forward, the light around him softening. You are to be the new holy light judge. Every 1,000 years, heaven selects one worthy soul to carry out the will of the divine in the human world. That soul is you. Avril stumbled back, her heart racing. But I'm no one. I'm just a healer. A villager. I don't understand Raya. The reasons are not for you to question, Seraphiel interrupted, his gaze firm but not unkind. The holy light sees what lies within, and it has found you worthy. You must now serve as its hand, its voice, and its judgment. The souls of the fallen cry out for redemption, and it is your duty to save them. The weight of his words pressed on Avril's chest. This was a burden she had never asked for, a responsibility beyond anything she could comprehend. She opened her mouth to protest, to beg for more time to understand, but before she could speak, Seraphiel raised a hand. A golden staff appeared before her, floating in the air. It was carved with intricate patterns, pulsating with a soft glow. This is the staff of the holy light, Seraphiel said. Through it, you will channel the divine's power. It will grant you the ability to heal the righteous and smite the wicked. But be warned, the path of the judge is not one of mercy. The light is absolute, and so too must be your judgment. Avril hesitated before reaching out to grasp the staff. The moment her fingers touched the cool surface, a surge of energy shot through her, filling her with warmth and light. For a brief moment, she saw the world as heaven must have seen it, as souls, bright and dim, filled with hope, sorrow, love, and sin. The vision was overwhelming, and she nearly collapsed under the weight of it. Seraphiel watched her carefully. You must begin your journey. There are those who await judgment. The angel's words echoed in Avril's mind as she set out on her first mission. A corrupt noble in the nearby town had long been the subject of rumors. He was said to hoard wealth while his people starved, exploiting his position for personal gain. The town was only a day's journey from Clearbrook, but as Avril approached the gates, she felt a growing sense of unease. Was it truly her place to decide this man's fate? Could she, a simple villager, now act as judge, jury, an executioner. The town was bustling with life, but the air felt thick with tension. Villagers kept their heads low as Avril passed, casting suspicious glances at the glowing staff she carried. She was no longer one of them, no longer just a healer. She was something else now, as something feared. At the noble's estate, she was greeted by armed guards who sneered at her request for an audience. But the staff of the Holy Light had its own authority, and with a mere wave of her hand, the guards fell silent, their weapons clattering to the ground. The noble, a man named Lord Elrin, lounged on a velvet couch as Avril entered his grand hall. His bloated form and jeweled fingers were in stark contrast to the poverty she had seen in the streets outside. "Who dares interrupt my evening?" he grumbled, not bothering to rise. Avril stood tall, her voice steady despite the nerves that churned within her. "I am Avril, the Holy Light Judge. I have come to pass judgment on your soul." Lord Elrin snorted, waving a hand dismissively. "Another zealot of the church, I see. They send you to preach to me? I've heard it all before. Go back to your temple." "This is not a request," Avril replied, the staff glowing brighter as she spoke. "The sins you have committed against your people have reached heaven itself. You will answer for them." A flicker of fear crossed the noble's face, but it was quickly replaced by anger. "You dare speak to me of sin? I've done what any man in my position would do. What is necessary to survive in a world where power is everything." "Your power is built on the suffering of others," Avril said, her voice firm. "You have forsaken the light." Lord Elrin sneered, but before he could respond, the staff in Avril's hand flared to life. A beam of pure, blinding light shot from its tip, enveloping the noble. He screamed, his form writhing in the glow as his soul was laid bare. Avril saw it all: his greed, his cruelty, his endless justifications for his actions. But beneath the layers of corruption, she also saw fear. Fear of losing control, fear of being powerless again. The judgment was swift. In a final, blinding flash, the light receded, and Lord Elrin collapsed to the ground. His body remained, but something had changed within him. His soul had been purified, cleansed of the darkness that had consumed him. He looked up at Avril, his eyes wide with disbelief. What have you done to me?" he whispered, his voice trembling. "I have saved your soul," Avril replied quietly, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. "You are free of your sins." As she turned to leave the estate, a heavy weight settled on her chest. The light had done its work, but the process felt wrong. Lord Elrin was a man who had committed terrible deeds, but seeing his fear, his desperation, made her wonder, was this true justice, or merely punishment disguised as salvation? The days following her first judgment passed in a blur. Avril traveled from town to town, village to village, each step heavier than the last. With each judgment, the same doubts gnawed at her. The Holy Light's power was absolute, but was its justice truly just? The more she saw of the human world, the more she realized how complicated people's lives were. There were no simple villains or heroes, only people trying to survive, trying to make sense of the chaos around them. One evening, as she made camp by the roadside, a man approached her. He was ragged and tired, his face lined with years of hardship. He wore the robes of a priest, though they were tattered and worn. "You're the Holy Light Judge," he said, his voice hoarse. "I've heard of you." Avril nodded, her hand tightening on the staff. "I am." The man sighed, sitting down across from her without waiting for an invitation. "I once served the light too. Preached its gospel, performed its rites. But now, I wonder if we ever truly understood it." "What do you mean?" Avril asked, surprised by the rawness of his words. "The light," he said, staring into the fire. "It's not as simple as they made us believe. They taught us that it was pure, that it could never be wrong. But the world isn't pure. People aren't pure. They're flawed, and so is the way we judge them." Avril felt a chill run through her as the priest's words echoed the thoughts she had tried to suppress. "Then what is the answer?" The priest looked up at her, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Maybe the light isn't meant to judge. Maybe it's meant to guide, to heal, to help people find their own way. The words stayed with Avril long after the priest had left. For the first time, she began to question her role, her purpose. Was she truly saving souls, or was she just another tool of a system that demanded obedience above all else? But as the doubts grew, so did the weight of her next mission, of the one that would bring everything she believed into question. Avril awoke the next morning with a heaviness in her chest, the priest's words lingering like a storm cloud over her thoughts. The staff at her side, still glowing faintly with divine power, felt like an anchor. She picked it up reluctantly, its weight growing heavier with every step she took toward the capital. The journey was long and filled with moments of introspection. The faces of those she had judged played over in her mind: Lord Elrin, the corrupt merchants, the thieves who had stolen to feed their families. Each had been found guilty in the eyes of the holy light, but their stories haunted her. Had she truly given them the justice they deserved, or had she simply enacted a cold, divine punishment with no room for understanding? By the time she reached the capital, the city loomed large before her, its towering walls casting long shadows over the roads. The bustling sounds of commerce and the distant cries of beggars filled the air as she walked through the city gates. The capital was a place of stark contrasts to gleaming spires where the wealthy and powerful resided, and narrow, filthy alleys where the downtrodden struggled to survive. Avril made her way to the grand cathedral at the heart of the city, its towering spires reaching toward the heavens like fingers grasping for divine approval. The Church of the Holy Light held immense power here, and it showed. The streets near the cathedral were pristine, lined with marble statues of past judges and saints. But even in this place of supposed purity, Avril could feel the tension in the air, a sense of unease that made her stomach twist. As she entered the cathedral, her steps echoed through the vast, empty hall. The grandeur of the place was overwhelming. High ceilings adorned with murals of angels and holy figures, stained glass windows casting rainbow hues across the marble floor. It was a place meant to inspire awe, but to Avril, it felt cold and distant. At the far end of the hall, a group of priests gathered, their ornate robes shimmering in the light. They greeted her with a mixture of reverence and wariness, their eyes flicking to the staff she carried. One of them, an older man with a thin, severe face, stepped forward to address her. "Avril, the Holy Light Judge," he said, his voice smooth and formal. "We have awaited your arrival." Avril nodded but said nothing, her gaze drifting to the grand altar behind him. A sense of foreboding settled over her as she approached the group. "The city is in turmoil," the priest continued. "A rebellion has begun, led by a heretic named Kale. He preaches against the church, rallying the common people to his cause. He must be stopped before his poison spreads any further." The mention of Kale's name sent a jolt through Avril. She had heard of him in passing during her travels, the rumors of a charismatic leader who challenged the authority of the church, who spoke of reform and justice for the people. But hearing it now, from the lips of the very institution Kale sought to overthrow, gave her pause. "What does he preach?" Avril asked, her voice measured. The priest's expression darkened. "Lies and blasphemy. He claims that the church has lost its way, that we no longer serve the people but our own interests. He seeks to turn the people against us, to disrupt the divine order." Avril studied the priest's face carefully, her mind racing. She knew well enough how power could corrupt, how even the holiest of institutions could lose sight of their original purpose. The corruption she had seen in the smaller towns, the greed and hypocrisy among some of the clergy, it all aligned with what Kale seemed to be fighting against. But was he truly a heretic, or was he simply speaking the truth that no one wanted to hear? "I will find him," Avril said quietly, her decision already made. She needed to see this man for herself, to hear his words and weigh his soul in the light of what she had learned. The priests exchanged uneasy glances but did not protest. They knew better than to question the will of the Holy Light Judge, even if that will led her toward a path they feared. The city streets were filled with unrest as Avril made her way toward the lower districts. The rebellion had already begun to take hold. A graffiti marked the walls, calling for freedom from the church's grip. People whispered Cale's name with a mix of fear and hope, and the tension was palpable. In the shadow of the towering buildings, Avril found herself drawn to a small gathering in a narrow square. At the center of the crowd stood a man, tall and strong, his voice carrying over the murmurs of the people. His presence was undeniably Cale, the leader of the rebellion. He was nothing like she had expected. There was no malice in his eyes, no sense of arrogance or greed. Instead, his gaze was sharp, his words filled with conviction. He spoke of justice, of a future where the church no longer exploited the poor, where the holy light served as a guide rather than an instrument of control. Avril stayed at the edge of the crowd, listening. She could feel the energy in the air, the hope that Cale's words inspired. But beneath it all, she sensed something else, something deeper, a truth that he had yet to reveal. When the crowd finally dispersed, Avril stepped forward. Cale's eyes met hers, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. He recognized her immediately, not by her face but by the staff she carried. "So, the holy light has sent its judge," Cale said, his voice steady. "I've been expecting you." Avril remained silent, her grip tightening on the staff. She studied him, trying to discern whether he was truly the enemy the church claimed him to be. But the more she looked, the more she saw a man who believed in his cause with all his heart, a man who had once been part of the system he now sought to dismantle. "I've come to pass judgment," she said finally, though the words felt hollow. She wasn't sure what judgment she would pass, not yet. Cale smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Judgment from the holy light? Or judgment from your own heart?" The question took her by surprise. It was as if he could see the conflict within her, the doubts that had been gnawing at her since her journey began. "You speak of justice," Avril said, her voice wavering slightly. "But justice is not rebellion. It's not turning the people against the church." "Isn't it?" Cale countered, his gaze piercing. "What is justice if not the righting of wrongs? The church has lost its way. You've seen it, haven't you? The corruption, the hypocrisy. They no longer serve the holy light, they serve themselves, and they use you, the judge, as their weapon." Avril's heart pounded in her chest. His words struck too close to the truth she had been avoiding. "The light is absolute," she said, though the conviction in her voice was fading. "Is it?" Cale asked softly. "Or have we all misunderstood what the light truly is? I was once like you, a servant of the church, blinded by their teachings. But then I saw the truth. The light isn't about judgment, it's about redemption. It's about giving people a chance to change, to be better. The church doesn't allow for that. They only demand obedience." Avril's hand trembled as she held the staff, her mind reeling. Everything she had believed, everything she had been taught, it was unraveling before her. Was Cale right? Had she been used as a tool of control, of punishment, rather than as a force for true justice? Before she could respond, a blinding flash of light erupted beside her. Seraphiel, the divine emissary, appeared once more, his wings outstretched, his golden eyes blazing with divine fury. "Enough!" Seraphiel's voice thundered, shaking the very ground beneath them. "Avril, you have strayed from your path. This heretic has poisoned your mind. You must fulfill your duty." Avril staggered back, the weight of the divine presence overwhelming her. But even as Seraphiel's words echoed in her ears, she felt a surge of defiance rising within her. I don't know if this is justice," Avril whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if the holy light is meant to judge in this way." Seraphiel's eyes narrowed, his expression hardening. "The light is absolute. You are its chosen. You will carry out its will." But Avril shook her head, her grip on the staff tightening. "I won't be a tool for punishment anymore. I won't destroy lives in the name of a justice I no longer believe in." Seraphiel's fury was palpable, but before he could strike, a new light began to glow from within Avril. It wasn't the harsh, blinding light of judgment, it was softer, warmer, like the first rays of dawn breaking through the darkness. The divine power within her shifted, changing from a force of destruction to one of healing and restoration. The staff, once a symbol of the holy light's judgment, now pulsed with a different energy, an energy that felt right, that felt true. Seraphiel stepped back, his face unreadable as the new light enveloped Avril. "You have made your choice," he said, his voice cold. "You are no longer the holy light judge." Avril met his gaze, her heart steady. "I'm not. But I am still a servant of the light, and I will use it to help, not to harm." With that, Seraphiel disappeared in a flash of light, leaving Avril standing alone in the square, her staff glowing softly in her hand. Kale watched her with a mixture of awe and respect, his eyes reflecting the new light that now radiated from her. "What will you do now?" he asked quietly. Avril smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I will do what I was always meant to do. I will heal, I will guide, but I will never judge again." Together, they turned toward the rising sun, ready to face the uncertain future with hope, compassion, and a new understanding of what true justice really meant.